All right, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us here today. I am joined here by Naiima Farah, and my name is Tarin, and I will be hosting this webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to go over um, our land acknowledgements. So I know that we're all here today virtually, but I want to acknowledge that we are on many ancestral lands, various Indigenous communities. I am currently in Toronto, Treaty 13, and the home of Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, and people who may still be unrecorded. As a settler myself, it is my duty to acknowledge the effects of colonialism that we still see today and the many ways that we may be participating in it. And this is by recognizing I can actively push back against it. As we go through this webinar, I want you to think about how you might be able to support Indigenous students and colleagues in your role to promote a whole campus approach to health and wellness, and also be an active participant in the reconciliation process. And this can look like participating in education on Indigenous peoples, their culture, language, arts, worldviews, and supporting organizations that help Indigenous communities. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker here today, Naiima Farah. Naiima is an African Canadian Black registered clinical social worker, educator, and mental health advocate. She is currently a faculty counselor at George Brown College's Counseling and Student Wellbeing Department, and she has an extensive history providing counseling and support to Black or racialized communities, which includes persons across lifespan, those of varying abilities, families, children, youth, newcomers, refugees, and international students. Without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Naima. And I believe you have slide control, so you should be good to go.
Thank you, Taryn, for that wonderful introduction and for all the support that you've provided prior to having this presentation today, as well as the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health for putting these wonderful programming to support the clinicians, educators, and students to support their mental health and well-being. I thank you for that. So for today's topic, I'll really be focusing on the importance of reclaiming Indigenous and cultural knowledge from an Afrocentric lens. And the reason being is that these are ways of knowing and doing that has sustained us for centuries pre-colonial and imperial conquest. And it is also the birth of anti-Black racism that's caused such destabilization that also impacts the mental health and well-being of Black students today. So we have to situate Black students and on a more systemic level of the things that are impacting their mental health and well-being as we think of ways to support them moving forward. And so with that in mind, it also centers this presentation that will be centering collective ways of healing, as these other forms such as imperial and colonial conquest were collective forms of destabilization for the broader community, which the Black students cannot be detached from. But before I do that, I really want to start us off with an ancestral blessing. It's important for us to acknowledge the presence of over 4 centuries of African peoples in Canada and in North America, and the contributions that they've made to this land across sectors and industries. It's important for us to also recognize the collective trauma caused by legacies of transatlantic slave trade and other forms of displacement, such as colonial and imperial violence, that continues to impact millions of Black peoples across North America, the Caribbean, and beyond. It's important for us to then collectively to acknowledge how anti-Black racism is embedded across various institutions, political, economic, and social institutions, and how they continue to be reinforced. And so today, as we gather, it's important for us to keep in mind that this is also, in a sense, a renewing of our commitment towards the creation of healthier communities through the dismantling of anti-Black racism and all forms of discrimination, to center healing of Black communities and Black flourishing, but also to connect us as a community, as it is important to not work in silos as we carry on with such work. So to situate Black students, we have to also look at the communities in which they are embedded in. Black Canadians account for 1.5 million of Canada's population. So that's about 4.3% of Canada's population, and make up about 16.3% of Canada's racialized population. Nearly half are born in Africa, and nearly 40% within the Caribbean, from Caribbean backgrounds. As you can see, this is a diverse community. And so whenever we talk about Indigenous frameworks, and in this case, the Afrocentric framework, it is important to understand the notion of staying rooted and how that really is very much connected as a resounding message across all African cultures and also within the African diaspora. I want to start us off with a quote over here, a proverb actually. It says, Akon la'an wa iftiin la'an. In other words, to be without knowledge is to be without light, is a Somali proverb. So there's this importance to always be aware. And in that awareness is from a holistic framework. As we will see later on, the past and the present is always intertwined. And it also centers us by trying to have a strong understanding of where we're moving into the future. For example, connected to this concept of Sankova, which is from the Western African tradition of the Akan tribe. It's also one of many ways that, as we see, also emphasizes a connection to the past. Sankova means it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. So it's not that the emphasis is not just being, being stuck in the past, but that there are important lessons. And as we think about healing, it's important to, in this sense, as African Canadians, as Black people, it's about also looking at, when we look to our past, there are things that have sustained us, whether there's medicinal knowledge, the knowledge of communal-based ways of healing, and also looking to the past, and we can also evaluate what worked for us as a community, so things we can leave behind, but also the good things that we can take from us. And there's always a lesson involved there. And as we can see, this is a tradition, as I said before, that even persons who have ancestries as peoples with the background as enslaved, peoples with a background of being enslaved Africans have also noted this, indicating a peoples without knowledge of their past, history, origin, culture is like trees without roots. And so this is Marcus Garvey, who also was a Pan-Africanist and indicated the importance of knowing one's roots in order to be strong and vibrant mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and beyond. So as I said, we see that then the meaning of time from the Afrocentric framework or African-centered knowledge is one where it is circular and interconnected, where the past, the present, and future are intertwined, and is also relational. So why have we indicated the Afrocentric framework? Why am I calling, for example, as others have, that one of the best ways to support Black student mental health and well-being is looking to Afrocentric framework? Is because it is in fact an asset-based approach that can be incorporated through a more of a holistic approach to mental health and well-being. So we can easily incorporate it through our whole campus approach to mental health and well-being, due also to its practical nature. It is also an Indigenous framework and holistic in nature. So that means it looks at not just looking at the mental health impacts of things such as systemic forms of marginalization, but also looks at how can we nourish mind, body, and spirit, because the whole person needs to be taken into consideration, as well as their relationship to communities. So we know that from the Afrocentric framework, if one does not have a balance, for example, if they don't have a good connection to the community, then that also impacts their overall well-being. There's also a liberatory and anti-colonial approach to mental health and well-being. So as we see more and more, if we're calling for an Afrocentric framework, there is this push to move away from just surviving and to look at thriving, right? Surviving is more reactionary, and that's what we want to move away from. And we want to look at how can we create environments, whether it's looking at programming in our campuses, to looking at the curriculum, to looking at even how we invite community members to support Black students, so that they're not just surviving, but they are in fact thriving, that we are concerned with. And it recognizes centering joy. We say that centering joy is important because too much of Black history, culture, or anytime we're having discussions on the Black community, whether it's locally or globally, is overwhelmingly from a negative lens, which can easily be internalized, not only by Black students, but by members of the Black community at large. So we want to create a balance of narratives in regards to this community. And so, as I noted, if we look at the Afrocentric framework, like similar to a lot of indigenous communities across the globe, including here on Turtle Island, it's really that relationship to the divine, focusing on spirituality, whether it's connection to God, a higher being, looking at also connection to ancestors. So a lot of times we'll also look to remembering the lessons passed down through our ancestors, remembering them, commemorating them, such as I did previously, because that's important to situating us and grounding us. It's also creating that balance and understanding relationships, the importance of relationship to family, our elders. So elders within the family unit, immediate family unit, as well as it is important for us to nurture our relationship to our elders, even outside, extending into the community. So those from our tribes, our clans, our community. And we say that our elders are really walking books because they have so much of our knowledge, which is critical to passing down to younger generations. And our in terms of even whether it's clan-based, tribe-based, but the elders in general are also play a pivotal role in resolving conflict. So in order to create greater unity amongst our community. And there's also relationship to the land and the environment, and respect and connection to all non-human entities. So overall, when we look at all these dimensions through the Afrocentric framework, then it is through this framework we are able to understand that the only way then to regain a good mental health and well-being is when we create harmony. And this has been the harm through colonial and imperial violence, as destabilization was caused, disunity was caused, displacement and disbandment was caused, and therefore leading to consequences for our overall mental health and well-being. And I will expand on that a little further. So as you can see with this proverb, it's actually a very well used proverb. It says, until the lion tells a story, the hunter will always be the hero. So it's also centering this aspect too within the African community, including the diaspora. A lot of our narratives, including the material used from elementary school to post-secondary education, even until more recently, even within healthcare institutions, whenever we discussed peoples of African descent or situated African history, it always started with the negative. But for example, it was a deficit point where that introduction started. So for example, we too often in educational institutions, for example, start with enslavement, rather than looking at what did Africans contribute to the world through science, mathematics, architecture, architectural design, and also the fact that advanced societies existed within the African continent pre-colonial and imperial contact. So whether it's some of the oldest learning institutions, universities such as Timbuktu in modern day Mali, the Ajuran tribe, from the Somali peoples, one could even say the land of Punt, or older civilizations have very much contributed and engaged in trade and had vast economic systems. Why is this important? Well, when in regards to talking about Black students, and when we're dealing with Black students, if the starting point is negative and devalues or even erases altogether the contributions of their source, the source from which they came from, it's very hard to get them actively engaged in the educational process, but more importantly, it contributes to other elements such as or setbacks, whether it's a lower self-confidence, internalized racism, as we'll discuss a little bit more. And so it is important to reclaim in the narrative of Africa and recentering it when we talk about Black people or introduce Black content, because it has implications for mental health and well-being, and it is a significant barrier to thriving, not only for Black students, but the Black community at large. And so when we talk about situating then Africa and introducing Africa, that is important because presenting Africa from a negative lens was critical to the construction of race and anti-Black racism, because you had to have groups that were considered to be inferior in relation to a superior white being of European background. And in particular, anti-Black racism, as you can see over here, is considered to be the policies and practices that are embedded in Canadian institutions that reflect and reinforce prejudice, attitudes, beliefs, stereotyping, and or discrimination directed at peoples of African descent, and is rooted in their unique history of enslavement and colonization. So in other words, story, narratives, the way we introduce people's histories matter, because people take this as an understanding and as a base in how to engage this community. So in this case, Black students. And so as we can see, great harm results as a result. So anti-Black racism was what it resulted in, the dislocation and displacement of the people, created disunity. And in other words, what is commonly referred to as soul wounds. So this is important as a concept because not everything that happens as a result of anti-Black racism is visible. It can also be the invisible wound that one does not see, but can lead to great harms for the community. And this results very early for Black Canadians. So as I said, I just want to drive the point home. We cannot detach Black students from what is happening at large, the wider system issues impacting their community. For Black Canadians, even at birth, in the womb, they are impacted by the stress of racialized, race-based stress. But then into childhood, we see in the child welfare system, for example, they are more than twice as likely to have their families investigated, 2.5 times more likely to be removed out of their homes while their families being investigated. And schools and the police are more likely to refer Black children in terms of cases for maltreatment. And when there are studies done, such as the Ontario Association Children's Aid Society, or the One Vision, One Voice, projects as well, we understand that a lot of it has to do with anti-Black racism, rather than this conceptualization that tends to be normalized in the narrative of Black families just being worse, not caring enough. It really goes back to other systemic issues that can't be divorced from the legacy of colonial and imperial violence, including rates of poverty, lack of employment, underemployment, rather than Black families not caring about Black children. When we look at the area of policing, which also impacts Black students as they can't be isolated from their communities, Black Canadians are 20 times more likely to be shot by police, account for 61% of cases where police used force resulting in death, and accounting for 70% of police shootings resulting in death. And that's from the Ontario Human Rights Commission report in 2018. And as we see with education too, higher dropout rates, higher suspension, expulsion rates. Taken as a whole, we must care at a post-secondary institutional level, because these are our students who are then coming to study our educational institutions. So it is important then to move with intentionality on how we are going to ensure that we work not only with our students, but with the community and Black serving organizations to provide better supports for them. So just this is not a complete list, but this is the harm from anti-Black racism on overall health and mental health. So stress, anxiety, internalized anti-Black racism, depression, early mortality, increased loneliness, and social isolation. So that is actually one of the consequences. So I want to also look at loneliness and social isolation. Take, for example, how traditionally our Indigenous knowledge and ways of being centered the collective well-being. And that's because we as human beings are social beings, but also so much of our knowledge, whether it's being in one together in ceremonies, the rearing of children. So even these common proverbs and phrases, it takes a whole village to raise a child. It's the collective that is emphasized, that one cannot be removed from. And even when we look at, for example, the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic as a reminder, how hard hit the Black community was in terms of a decline in overall mental health and well-being. It's not that it was just the COVID-19 pandemic, but before that, we had the anti-Black racism pandemic. Racism was something that continued to impact Black mental health and well-being, but also the sources of a structure for us that centered us. The reliance of our community was something so many of us were removed from. So we couldn't go to our communities. We couldn't hang out with our friends, as they would say, for younger people. And so this had a significant impact on mental health and well-being for the Black community. So what does this mean for us? I want to look at these two concepts. So the first concept is when we look at Black wholeness, it's creating that harmony between the dimensions I've mentioned before. But the concept of Limaveo, this concept is a Somali concept, which is the concept of unity, of oneness, and wholeness. And if we look at also its interrelation, how it's related to the notion of Ubuntu, it's the concept of unity. It's this whole notion of I am because we are. So this aspect that our sense of humanity can never be divorced from one another. And so when we look at then, what does this mean for Black students? It means that in a world that unfortunately has been largely anti-Black, it is important then to look at how do we foster a sense of belonging in recreating those environments that allow them to thrive from a proactive stance. And so I carry on over here. It's this notion of sacred spaces, sacred healing spaces. And so what I want to center over here is this notion of looking at the importance of creating cultural spaces for Black students that are affirming, where healing and transmission of cultural knowledge can take place. And this is important because we have to look at the fact that one of the major consequences of colonial imperial violence has been the policing of Black emotions. So when we look at the importance of healing, then we have to look at how do we create spaces where Black students, in this case, can feel comfortable enough to express their emotions, and where also that lesson can take place and how they can express it in healthy ways. But really, just pause there. Think of the stereotypes that are common in our society. So, for example, if a Black woman is deemed to be too emotional, there's this notion of the angry Black woman. What does that mean when they have that in the back of their mind, but they need support, mental health related supports, and they fear coming in because they're afraid of expressing those emotions? What does it mean for a young Black man who, because of the way through colonial discourses has been presented as a threat, right? The notion of the thug, the notion of the brute, the Black brute. What does that mean? How does that prevent them from seeking support? So it is important not only for them to have those space to be able to express themselves without policing themselves too much, that can also prevent healing, but also safe cultural affirming spaces that allows the guidance for elders. So having those spaces where elders can be invited in. For us at George Brown College, we have various initiatives, as well as committees and networks that allow that as well. That I've also been very much able to fortunately work closely with. For example, the Black Futures Committee, which is a collaboration of faculty members and students, and where we also work closely with the Black community to provide supports, not only for students, but also looking at how do we create welcoming environments where we can all work together to ensure that we tackle issues of anti-Black racism, but and together create a more vibrant and more welcoming environment for all. Because when we address issues such as anti-Black racism, it becomes a welcoming and thriving environment for all, not just Black people. And then the Black Student Success Network has also done amazing work in terms of providing supports for Black students through a peer support angle, where also individuals like myself, faculty members, have been able to work closely with them as well. And also I emphasize this aspect of, as we think of how do we support Black student mental health and well-being, to look beyond working in silos. So inviting community-led organizations, both Black-led and Black-serving, but also emphasizing how do we support also bringing in Black-led organizations. Because if we're going to have a commitment to addressing issues such as anti-Black racism, it's about creating opportunities, not only for them to only work with Black students, but also creating opportunities for partnerships and collaborations with post-secondary institutions. But if you're not coming from a post-secondary institution, looking at also how you can work with Black-led organizations to support the Black community. Because ultimately, if we're going to talk about Black mental health and well-being, whether it's for Black students or not, we also have to center the Black community in those endeavors. So now I'm going to look at practical ways that we can look at supporting Black students. For example, this is me at I was at the 24th annual mental health conference. And this was a presentation that I did as a group on the importance, of storytelling. So we have a storytelling project where we collaborated. Counseling Student Wellbeing has collaborated with the ESL department, and we hope to expand that as well at large across the college as well. But looking at the power of storytelling. So one, for me on my end, I utilize African storytelling Afro-Indigenous storytelling to reclaim our narratives, but also I use such a platform to also call on the importance of looking at our curriculum, right? And through this group, we've done an amazing job. And so I just have my colleagues out in the front, but we did an amazing job in trying to call for looking at our curriculum in a more holistic fashion as well. The TLX department has also done a lot of great work at George Brown College in looking at how we can revamp curriculum and just how do we also train educators to be aware of how a lack of contribution or inclusion of communities that have had a history of being marginalized, and when they are not able to share their perspectives, how that can lead to further silencing these communities. And so collaborating with Black students is important as well. It's important to look at them as contributors of knowledge and the contributors in the process of their education. So looking at even including them in focus groups while creating curriculum would be helpful, as well as providing mentorship opportunities to them, whether it is through the school or connecting them to different organizations. We're not going to go too much into this, but dance and body movement, these are ways that whether you're a counseling department or even at the broader campus, these are things that you can incorporate that are practical too. One, we know that it's a workout, so body movement is a workout, but also for Black students, dance, music, body movement has been something that we've used for centuries to connect with community as well as ceremony, to pass down oral tradition and knowledge of who we are as people, but also it is a way to ground them and support their overall mental health and well-being as a result. So land-based healing is another approach that one can use, whether it is from the college campuses, universities, or even in outside community services. One of the things that impacts the Black community is food insecurity. So using land-based approaches, for example, gardening, growing one's own crops, vegetables, things that provide skills that allow them to sustain themselves, but also to reclaim what it means to grow our own food. One of the consequences of colonial imperial violence is that we've been made to grow food for the consumption of simply others, other societies. For example, through enslavement, it was for massa, building also the infrastructures of the nation state, while experiencing things such as hunger and starvation in our own community. So this is also not only a way to resist, but also to restore and to allow the support of our overall mental health and well-being. It can easily be incorporated into programming for schools. And finally, I really want to look at also one of the major things that impacts the Black community. For example, toxic productivity is a notion that we need to reevaluate. In the society, it seems as though one is, they tend to get more of a support or acknowledgement when they're overworking themselves. So it's important to look at how rest leads to restoration, heals mind, body, and spirit for us, and also looking at what the denial of rest meant for us as a peoples of African descent, but also looking at the impact of not doing things such as unplugging from news, social media, as one of the areas we need to focus on because of also the sources of trauma that it can serve for us as a community. For example, when we look at issues such as police-related violence, shootings, it seems to be on loop, and that is not healthy for us as a people and for students. And so it's important as we work with students to also emphasize the importance of rest, and also adding in there is a good sleep hygiene and the importance of that. And finally, I put this one over here because not every college campus or university campus, post-secondary institution has the privilege of being, for example, in Toronto, where we have such a diverse community and where one can have more access to grooming products that are culturally relevant. So things to consider is uh, creating, for example, Black hair care stations at your college campuses to ensure that Black students can maintain their grooming habits, but also looking at in this area as a way of an opportunity to partner with Black-owned vendors to provide access to culturally relevant grooming supplies. I mean, when I spoke to different students, not only at George Brown College, but who are doing maybe different a degree program, diploma program right now, and they came from areas where they didn't have a lot of a large Black community. One of the things they spoke about was just how difficult it was to get access to such products. I look at my own experience, and when I was studying outside of Toronto in the GTA, I had to rely on my family to bring such supplies. So just think of it in this way: if you're going to invite Black students, look at the way this could impact overall mental health and well-being. So this is my contact info. If you ever need to contact me, with that in mind, I'll just open up for discussions. Sorry.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Naiima. That was an amazing presentation. Any questions? I do see one question in our Q&A section, so I'm going to ask that. I think one powerful way we can demonstrate allyship with Black and Brown students at this time to demonstrate solidarity for pro-Palestinian advocacy and encampments on various campuses now. This would make our students feel safe, seen, and heard. What would you recommend would be the best ways to do that? Oh, you're unmuted, Naima.
Sorry, I just want to read the question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the other questions are popping up. So in terms of, support and allyship, first and foremost, one of the things I would say is when we look at specific communities, so when there are particular issues impacting certain communities, one, to center them and work on, so I would say connect with them to see how they feel would be the best way to support them, but also to be mindful of the different points in ways in supporting them. So on my end, my focus on the mental health and well-being of students. So from the lens of a counselor, looking at how different things such as war, political violence, can impact mental health and well-being. And so we always make sure that our students know that they come seek out support from the counseling framework when it comes to, as I said, particular nation states, or communities. It's ensuring that they are the ones who are leading any movement. So I have to make sure that I can't necessarily speak for that one community, but for students, it's really is looking at, do we have things in place to support their mental health and well-being? In terms of allyship, I think it goes beyond just that, right? It looks at, we have to look at it from a holistic framework, right? And not just be reactionary. What are we doing overall, right? Not just in the moment. What are we doing overall? How are we welcoming and inviting? Sorry, it's different. So how are we addressing issues to begin with, right? Our voice is silence. Where, for example, if it's the Palestinian community, for example, do we have their voices heard? Do they show up in the curriculum? How do they show up in curriculum, for example, as educators, right? Looking at this way, when I compare it to the Black community, how has the Black community been shown thus far? It's been very one-dimensional. And why I look at it that way is I really look at the angle of the importance of storytelling. Storytelling is important because not only does it have the power to create erasure, but it also has the power to fix the ways people appear or communities appear in the minds. So anytime we look at any issues such as war and violence, we have to look at how have they been depicted thus far. When we can depict people in that way, it's easy to negate their sense of humanity. And as far as what do our students need, like I said earlier before, affirm your students, look at them as experts in their own lived experience. Ask them. I think that's what I've heard overwhelmingly from students, whether it's Black students or students from any background, has been, we are tired of being people talking at us. People don't talk to us, whether it's educators or older folks, talk to us. And they are very knowledgeable. So talk to them, humanize them, ask them what they need. And I think that goes for all of us really across the board, across age, race, culture, religion. Humanize one another, talk to one another, understand one another.
Thank you so much, Naiima, for that really great response. And I have another question. Can you explain your role as a faculty counselor? What does that mean?
Sure, sure. So for me, I'm a counselor, so I work with students, whether it's one-to-one, providing counseling sessions for them to support their mental health and well-being, including connecting them to referral services if they require that out into the community or even within the college campus regarding the supports that they may need. But also, there's also the education piece as well, right? We are connected to the different departments and provide opportunities to engage other departments. So, for example, I spoke about the storytelling project that I'm engaged with other colleagues with the ESL department. So that also provides opportunities for us to do programming to support the mental health and well-being of students, but also we provide information on our services to different departments. But as far as counseling, so look at it from a wider lens, support the mental health and well-being of our students and working alongside our faculty counselors from a background of emphasizing a whole campus approach. Because as I said, we can't work in silos, we must work together.
Thank you for that. I have a few questions about if the recording will be emailed to the attendees. It will not be emailed, but it will be available on our website. That is campusmentalhealth.ca. Naiima, next question. Do you have any guidance or advice in terms of engaging Black students in programming? And this is another question that kind of tacks on to that in terms of outreach to Black students.
Sorry, was that just set or was it written over here? I couldn't see it. I didn't catch it. So in terms of engaging Black students, I've said it before as well, to just expand on that. Look at your students as experts in their lived experience. So in terms of engaging with them, one is also coming from that space of humility, right? So instead of just running to design programming, are we connecting with them to get their input, right? Or are they an afterthought? Ask questions. As far as engaging students, it's about relationship building, ultimately. So if, for example, you have a Black Student Association, if you don't, I encourage you to have one created, contact your Black students at your campus. I would say show up for them. So for example, if they have a program, an event coming up, see how you can connect with them. See how you can support them if you can. But it's going to be very hard to engage them if you just pass them by or maybe don't even say hi, right? They're people at the end of the day. So communicate with them, encourage them, reach out to them, and try to build a relationship with them.
I also want to plug that CICMH has a student engagement toolkit on our website. If that might be helpful, that could be a great place to start thinking about engagement strategies. There's another question. How would you recommend getting buy-in from institutional stakeholders to build in appropriate supports for Black students? What would be some of the foundational first steps?
So in terms of, can you repeat that last piece? So
Yeah. So, first piece is how would you recommend getting buy-in from institutional stakeholders to build in appropriate supports for Black students? And then the second part is what would be some of the foundational first steps?
So I will say this, because as someone who has who had the opportunity to work across the board, whether it's been educational institutions or in policy and so forth, I always say we have to go beyond just reports. Reports can be created and collect dust on a shelf, right? And so when I was also creating this webinar, it was with the intention of it's not just focusing on harms done to Black people. We speak so much about anti-Black racism. It's about the solution piece. And we can't talk about programming, supports, and buy-in without connecting with the community and also creating space for the community to lead in projects or creation of any programming that is supposed to be tailored towards them. So if, for example, as institutions, whether they've been educational institution, healthcare related institutions, even our policymakers across the board, they've all made statements that equity or inclusion or anti-Black race, we're just creating an environment where we address these issues. It's about moving from words to action. And I would say presenting it back to them. These are your words. These are what you've stated. This is what you've written. Do you have that framework? Are you going to reach out to the Black community? Right? Who's leading your research? So if you have research to implement a project that's supposed to be for the Black community and you have no Black researchers, we have a problem. Right? If you are in an organization and you want to deal with the issue of Black mental health or education, how many do you have hired? Do you have a strategy to hire Black people? What does the hiring panel look like? So it's about moving from words to action. I think that Black people in Canada for over 400 years have been telling the nation state and also here in this on Turtle Island what we've needed, right? So I think that it's about moving with good intention and prioritizing that. And if it's a priority, then they will know because we are ready to have them reach out to us as we have been reaching out to them.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take one final question. So mandatory inclusion of Black contributions in various subjects is about to be rolled out in elementary schools in Ontario. What, if any, impact do you hope that could have on the mental well-being of students when they arrive in post-secondary schools?
Thank you for that. It's actually a wonderful question. I would say one of the things that I would say to be mindful of, one, it's very important, and I want to also really commend the community as well and pushing for that because I have been doing that for a very long time, even before I was born, and even parents can even imagine having me. But I would say to look at creating a balance, to not get into this aspect where we're just fixed on things of just such as trauma. It's important to remember, but it's also to remember that we are more than just the narratives of trauma, but to start, for example, look at our starting point. Did we start with the creation and contributions of Black people in Canada? So that the starting point is not Black people in shackles and chains, because that can impact and re-traumatize members of the community, including our children. It's also looking at the diversity and embracing that within the Black community, right? So just as when I work with different educators, just as I say, do we have a balance of voices being heard? Do we have, how do you have, for example, books at your English class, right? Your English course, whose voices are being heard? And the same can also be said for the Black community. Do we have a balanced representation of scholars? I think that's a starting point. Um, and also to embrace um, creating spaces and also calling for the creation of spaces to bring all of us together and celebrating that diversity, I would say, is important.
Wonderful. We will have to unfortunately end our question and answer period right now. However, I do want to thank everybody for coming today. Our next webinar will be on May 27th on gambling within post-secondary institutions. I have put the registration link in the chat if you're interested in attending. But I want to thank everybody for coming in today, and I want to thank Naiima for such a wonderful, wonderful presentation, excellent content. And there's a lot of interest for folks to come to look at your slides and look at the recording again. The recording will be available on our website at the end of the day. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. And yeah, we'll see you at the end of the month again. Wonderful.